You checking in with Mike Williams from the LA Chargers, and you're tuning into Chargers Unleashed.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. Today's show, of course, being brought to you by BetOnline, Aura, AG1, Rock Solid Sports Memorabilia, and Mint Mobile. If this is your first time tuning into the show, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. Dan Wolkenstein. The Chargers officially wrapped up their final preseason practice before tomorrow's game against the San Francisco 49ers, the final preseason game of the season, which we know is vital for a number of different team members as we are getting closer and closer to the final 53-man cut down. Again, as I have said many times, if you guys go ahead and do this at home, it's going to give you as big of a headache as it has given Dan and myself. But for today's show, on the eve of the final preseason game, there's a saying that we have around here, if this is your first time tuning into the show, when Dan Wolkenstein works the phones, great things tend to happen. And special guest on the show today to give us all of the up-to-date news on the latest in Chargerland. Dan Wolkenstein, if you would.
Jeff Miller from the LA Times joins us on Chargers Unleashed today. Great friend of the show. Jeff is so fun to hang out with. Incredible insights. Does a great job for LA Times covering this Chargers team. Lots of things to discuss with him in regards to this last preseason game, roster battles ensuing, kind of surprises and impressions so far during camp and preseason, and what to expect with kind of the final 53-man roster in its upcoming season. But Jake, before we get to that, got to talk about our friends over at AG1. We have mentioned this multiple times. 4 ice cubes, 1 scoop of AG1. Your life will transform. Your life will be better. You will feel much better about yourself. Let's talk about our friends over at AG1.
Is that still how you're taking it, by the way, Dan? Is 4 ice cubes minimum?
Yep. My daughter actually helps me put the ice cubes in the thing now, which has been fun.
Oh, that's just adorable. So, guys, over at AG1, your daily foundational nutrition supplement that supports whole body health, and I drink it literally every day. For someone like myself who has not kept up as it relates to his diet, very much into self-help, going to the gym. But once I get out of there, the eating habits of me are not the best. So how does AG1 help you? It's a comprehensive solution and what you need from a supplemental routine. AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that delivers comprehensive nutrients to support whole body health, replaces your multivitamin probiotics, and in one simple drinkable habit. AG1 is raising the standard for quality in supplement category, and it helps you build your health foundation first. Again, guys, if you are not the biggest vegetable consumers out there, like myself, or if your eating habits are not up at par, AG1 does what it needs to do in giving you all your daily multi-nutritional vitamins and vegetables. And I kid you not, as it relates to gut health and getting things where you need them to be around the waist, it definitely does the job.
All right, well, we're very excited today. Very special guest, friend of the show. You've been here many times now, Jeff, and very thankful for you. Mr. Jeff Miller from the LA Times joins us on Chargers Unleashed. Jeff, how's it going, man? You made it through camp. Next stop is Santa Clara. How have you been?
Yes, we made it through camp. Yesterday was a big day for the media. We survived another one, so we're excited about that. Yes.
Yes, I will say, yesterday felt like it was like 4:30 on a Friday at those press conferences where, like, okay, I don't want to stand between you and happy hour. Let's just get this thing out of here. Hopefully happy hour drinks were had.
That was kind of the feeling yesterday. I think everybody, the thing is, people don't understand how this works. The Chargers were in one part of Costa Mesa for the first 16 practices. In the last 2 practices, they moved to their facility in Costa Mesa, a couple miles away. So it kind of seemed like training camp ended, and then everybody moved over, and then training camp started again. So there was a couple of days there. The last 2 days felt a little extraneous. So yeah, by the end yesterday, and then they practiced hard and pads and long yesterday, and which I don't think any of us saw that coming either. So by the time that got over, yeah, everybody was pretty much ready to let's get to this last game, get past this, and let's go. You know.
Yep, I don't blame you. I don't blame them because it's a grueling time getting through this. I know it's a lot to cover for the team, but it's tough going up against the same guys for the most part the entirety of the preseason, other than the games themselves and joint practice. Lots to discuss today. Want to talk to Jeff about the roster battles so far. that need to be decided or remaining. We'll talk about some of the surprises of preseason, as well as some of the differences or expectations of this running game specifically. So obviously, got to talk about the tight end and wide receiver 6 position. Preview game 3 of what to expect versus the Niners. And then who has the least and most to gain this preseason game, which will be a fun one. But first, let's start off with the roster battles. Technically, Brendan Staley said yesterday, Jeff, that the kicking battle is not yet decided. Air quotes on my side. Other roster battles. I think you got tight end 3-4. You've got running back 3-4. You've got safety 4. You've got corner 6. What are some of like the key roster battles remaining that you think can be decided here at this third preseason game?
Well, before we go into any of those other ones, so the kicker thing, you're not buying it?
No. I've sold that faster than my last car. No.
So why is everybody called this thing? Like a bunch of people around the team that cover the team, a lot of us, a lot of other people think it's over. I don't know that it's over. Why is it so? Why are we so convinced?
I like how I've become the person asking questions without answering the questions. But look, I'll stick my neck out there. I don't mind. Look, what Dustin Hopkins did on one leg is insane. And I know that that's probably something that this training staff and the coaching staff does not take lightly with how good he was leading into the injury and all that kind of stuff. Then camp starts, battle starts. He gets injured again, unfortunately. Doesn't have a chance to show himself. Cameron Dicker, younger, who actually finished off the season last year, did great. Then comes out during camp and preseason and balls out. He's over 90% success rate on his kicks. Then Dustin Hopkins comes back for a bit, misses a couple kicks during I think it was during the joint scrimmage that could have won the game or simulated game. Cameron Dicker is younger. Cameron Dicker has had more success in the training camp and in preseason. Cameron Dicker has shown success last year. Unfortunate for Dustin Hopkins, but I just don't see how they can tell themselves we're going to release a 90+% success kicker for someone because he was injured and want to give him a fair shot.
The one thing I would say is I think, Hopkins is a stronger leg. And if there's a 55-yard kick that this team needs to win a game, I'd rather have him kicking it. Now, having said that, you're right about the injury situation. I mean, you look at Hopkins last, whatever it's been, 8-10 months now. He's been hurt twice. So I think ultimately that's probably gonna swing the thing. But I'm telling you, like if it was inside of 50, there's no reason not to believe wholeheartedly in Dicker. When you get a little farther out, I think Hopkins is the more likely candidate to hit a long one. And you know how these teams are in the NFL now, you're 50, 55 yards, you're expected to make those. And I don't know that the Chargers can feel that way about Dicker. Now, having said all that, you're probably going to be right. And but it is interesting how I'm like the only person that I've talked to, not that I talked to myself, but
don't lie, Jeff. Yes, you do.
Among all the other people I've talked to about this, everybody else is like you. That's all. Oh, it's Dicker. It's Dicker. This whole thing's a charade. So I don't know. I still seem to think there's something there, and maybe who knows? Maybe Friday something happens in that game. We never know. We'll see what happens. But I'm not 100% sure that it's completely over.
Let's just role play for a second. Let's say I'm Tom Telesco, and I say, "Dear Chargers fans, we have decided to go with Dustin Hopkins." And Chargers fans are, up in arms, flames everywhere. And they ask, why? And he says, well, he can kick further than Cameron Dicker. Like that doesn't work.
You're just dismissing that he's more experienced. He's done this longer. He's been through more stuff.
Okay, well that's why Jeff should be role playing, not me, because Jeff knows all of the ins and outs more than I do.
The best part about what you just said, Dan, was when you said it, I was like, okay, Tom Telesco makes the decision, and the Chargers fans go up in arms. Was like, hey, yeah, what's new? Okay, it's like, come on now.
That's right, exactly. They're going to be up in arms no matter what happens. So
this is true.
But yeah, it probably will be Dicker, but I don't know. I do think there's maybe just a little. It may not be completely decided. You know, and the thing is, these coaches, they like to. They're not going to make a decision until everything's in. And so the one thing they would tell, the reason they wouldn't say anything, like yesterday, you know, Staley's not going to tell us who the guy is because they got to get through this game. And what happens if one of them gets hurt in the game or something happens in warmups, and then we're, you know, so
Worst case scenario.
they're gonna let the whole thing play out, and it probably will be Dicker ultimately. But I don't know. Maybe I'm hoping for some drama, for something to get excited about, because otherwise, let's be honest, there isn't. I mean, you're rattling off there were some sixes in there. There were some fours. Those are not like really riveting battles that people are, you know, hanging on. They're going to be watching this game real close.
Well, don't tell Chargers fans that, because that is hanging in the balance of reason why Tom Telesco should keep or lose his job. It's because of the tight end 4, wide receiver 7, DB 10. Like that's where we're at. But of the roster battles remaining, what are the ones that you feel are most out there?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you guys. I don't think there's a ton on the line in terms of a guy making the team or not making the team on Friday. I really don't. You look at. I was going through yesterday, and you kind of project what's going to be that initial 53. We think. I mean, when you know, and the thing to keep in mind too about this is that's just the first one, and then that happens on Tuesday. They practice next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I wouldn't be surprised by Thursday if that 53 has changed or could change. So it just
how would it change?
Well, in terms of, you know, you get that initial 53, and then they could make other moves. You know, they could make a move.
I see.
Not the least of which, you know, maybe a guy, they make that 53 and the guy's not ready and they got to put him on IR, and then they got to bring, you know, there's those kind of things. So yeah, I'm not saying there's going to be some massive trade or anything, but just there's, you know, that first 53 is just to get there, and then it still can, and certainly before they play a game, it could change. So, but you look at that initial 53, and it seems pretty set right now. And I think the only thing that there's a little bit of room for is the whole injury situation, which we're going to have to kind of watch here. Donald Parham didn't practice this week. Gerald Everett didn't finish practice yesterday. You know, Jamari Salyer didn't really practice fully yesterday. But, you know, those are things to kind of watch. And while none of those there's no indication that they're serious stuff. We'll have to see how that kind of plays out as we go through these next few days. And you know, those are things that could impact some roster decisions and could ultimately impact the week 1 roster that we see.
Jeff, kind of an extension of the player competition, position battles, whatever you want to call it, that's been taking place. Obviously, long camp, lots to evaluate over the last several weeks that you've been able to see up close and personal. But I wanted to get your opinion just on any surprises of camp that you've seen thus far, and whether we're talking about specific players that have stood out, or even just your evaluation of, let's just say, Kellen Moore with a new offensive system, Derek Ansley now as the defensive coordinator. What are some of the things that you know, have raised your eyebrows a little bit in training camp?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. It's a little bit maybe, I don't know how much people are talking about this, but like Chris Rump, he really seems like he's improved. He did a lot more defensively in training camp than I would have anticipated. And that's a guy who, you know, maybe he's going to get a little more run on defense. You know, hopefully, you know, Charger fans, you want Bosa and Mack to be out there the whole time, or as much as they can be out there. And these guys would love to play those guys a bunch. But he was a guy I thought it looked really improved. He really seemed like he belonged, you know, defensively. And we know what he can do on special teams. He's pretty solid there. But that was a guy who kind of surprised me. I think, you know, Kenneth Murray, everybody who's watched him the last couple of weeks, 3 weeks, has said, yeah, he looks better. You know, he looks more confident. He looks like he looks like a real solid linebacker now. You know, where in the past there were some, you know, there were questions about him and just kind of the consistency and where he was at times. But he seems like he's really matured and taken a step forward too. That's another guy who to me, I don't know how much of a surprise it was, but it's certainly It certainly was a positive, and I think they're really excited about where he is. The one thing that is really the last couple of days we've all been talking a lot about is Quentin Johnston, and I mean this issue with drops is real. I don't think that's going to be something to watch. I think we really people watching this team, fans of this team, are probably going to have to really temper their expectations at the start of the season, because the way he's looked at times on some of these in some of these practices, you kind of wonder. I mean, how much trust do they have in this guy right now, and how much trust does Herbert have in him right now? And I don't know that's a ton. And a guy like that, they're playing the Dolphins week 1. That's a big game. They're going to need to win that game. And I don't know, I wouldn't be shocked if Johnston doesn't play a ton early on, just because he's still got some stuff to prove to the coaches and to Justin Herbert.
Is the thing to prove for him is just reliability in terms of like literally catching it? Like, I know he seemed to look much better during the second preseason, the first preseason. That could have been just like preseason jitters, number one out of the way. And I know I think it was Daniel Popper mentioned there were a couple drops that he had this week at camp. He mentioned it and he owned it, saying that's one of the things he wants to work on, is kind of being more aggressive at the catch point and focusing more. Like, is that it? Is it just like he just has to focus?
That seems to be what we're hearing from him. Yeah, to his credit, we asked him, Popper and I went back and forth at him a couple of times with questions yesterday about trust and hands and all that. And he stood there and answered them all. And he did own up to it. And he said, yeah, at TCU, he had a problem, and he admitted he got down on himself early at TCU, and he expressed to us yesterday he's matured through that. He's not that way anymore. He doesn't lose his confidence or doesn't get down on himself, is how he really said it yesterday. And the thing about this is, I was talking to Keenan Allen early in training camp about this. And he said the first thing is you got to earn the confidence and the trust of the coaches so they give you chances. And I think he's done that for the most part. Now, the next one is, as Keenan told me, is now you've got to earn, when you get those chances, then you got to earn the quarterback's trust. And that's the real important one. And I asked him specifically how he felt he's done on that. And he said he thinks Herbert trusts him. If you ask Herbert, and publicly, he'll say, "Oh yeah, he's a star. He's going to be great. Yeah, we love him and all that." But we'll see when the games start and he's running a route whether he goes there or not. And the one on Tuesday that we all saw, it was the first play of a 2-minute. They were simulating a 2-minute deal at the end of a game or end of half. There was 52 seconds left. They were sort of, near midfield trying to go for a field goal or whatever this exact scenario was. The very first play, he's running a crosser, not a long pass, not a difficult pass. He's got the advantage on the defensive back. The ball hits him right in the hands and he drops it. In a real game, we all know, right? That's a killer. You don't want to start a 2-minute situation with 52 seconds left and drop with a drop. And I guarantee you, after Herbert, was talking to him and stuff, but I'm going to tell you, in a real game, if that scenario comes up, Herbert's not going to throw that ball. Like, he's going to look, and he's going to look somewhere else probably, because it's real important. As a quarterback, his job is to get that team points, get the team in the end zone, get the team whatever the situation they're looking for.
Yeah, it's not to get the receiver out of a rut. That's not his job.
Yeah. He's going to look to guys who he trusts. And the thing about what we're talking about here is he's got 3 wide receivers in front of him that Herbert trusts completely. Those 3 guys he knows he can go to. He knows he can go to Eckler. He knows to a little bit of a lesser degree he's got Gerald Everett. So those are all targets that are there that Herbert knows. And I'm sure in his heart of hearts that as much as Justin wants this guy to succeed, and he knows how important he can be to the team eventually, right now, whatever it is, 2 weeks before the first game, I'm sure that Justin in the back of his mind is like, no, I haven't seen enough. And I know I'm sure the coaches are saying the same thing. It's not, This isn't a Herbert thing. This is like a team thing. And they're all saying the same thing, I'm sure.
And I wonder if it, becomes, similar to like, it used to be 3rd and Allen, where like in those gotta have it plays, like it went to Keenan Allen. And I wonder if it might just turn into expressing itself in the way that may not go to him in the gotta have it plays, but like in those deep shot plays, like in the ones that they want to, change direction and catch folks off guards, that might be where they go. But if it's 3rd and 6, like I think they, like you mentioned, like Josh Palmer, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, they all have like they can be that guy.
Yeah, absolutely. They will take their. I think what you're getting at, Dan, is exactly what it's going to be. I think they're going to pick their spots with Quentin more than just let's roll these 4 receivers and we're going to rotate them through, and they're going to be lining up all over the place, doing different stuff. We're going to take advantage of all of them. It's going to be with Quentin early on. Now, I'm just talking about the start of the season. Maybe 2-3 weeks into the season, maybe this isn't an issue. Maybe he plays really well, and we're not talking about this anymore. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think that's going to happen. I think this is going to be something we're going to be talking about. But I think what you'll see is they'll pick their spots where they're okay. Now he'll come in, and he'll kind of decoy maybe a play or two, and then there'll be a play where okay, this one's going to him. If all things being equal, you're the target, and everyone's going to know on the offensive side this is where we're going, and he's going to have to make those plays, make those simple, NFL relative simple plays and show to these guys, show to this whole team, teammates, coaches, quarterback, that I can do this. You can count on me doing the simple stuff. And then eventually, if he can do that and he can do the stuff that to be an NFL wide receiver, you have to be able to do, then they can try to expand it, try to do more stuff with him and try to get a little more exotic and try to do things where they'll be able to more, use his skill set and try to take advantage of that, yards after catch and the breakaway stuff and why they drafted him in the first place.
One thing that I think will help not only Quentin Johnston and these receivers and Justin Herbert would be if we can actually finally see a competent running game by this offense. And Kellen Moore's brought in for a very large reason to fix the running game on this offense. What are some of your, expectations of this running game this year so far because of camp and preseason, what you've seen so far? Like, what do you take away from that we'll see this year that's different to the eyes and to the stat sheet maybe than what we saw last year?
Well, I think what they're going to try to do is they're going to try to be, with the caveat being when you're running backs, Austin Eckler, he's not a big bruising Ezekiel Elliott kind of player. But I think the idea is they want to be more of a physical, between the tackles, like try to exert some will and some power and try and just to be and be more of a complete kind of running team and try. They've told us from the beginning of camp, even before that, this whole establish an identity of the run game, and it's just just so people realize I'm not just copping out like I sometimes do. It is hard to in preseason to really get a sense of the run game. It's really hard because they're not tackling to the ground. These guys aren't breaking tackles. You don't really know exactly what it's going to look like. But if their offensive line can stay together, stay healthy, that will be a big part of it. And then it's going to be a question of if one of those backs behind Eckler can kind of become more of a threat than just be a guy they can throw in there to give Eckler a break for a play or two. That's the stuff that we really won't know until the season starts. We're going to know the first half against Miami how it's. We'll have a much better sense, a much better sense in the first half of Miami than we have had throughout since they hired Kellen Moore, because it's really a hard thing to judge and try to figure out just by watching, because it's not real. What we're seeing isn't real. It's simulated, and it gets real in that first game, and then we'll have a much better sense, at halftime of that game even than we have right now. But you're 100% right. The Chargers, for everybody bagged as much as everybody bagged on the offense and get Lombardi out of here, Joe Lombardi, get him out of here. They were third in the NFL in passing yards last year. Third, right? And there were two teams, the Chiefs and Mahomes and the Bucks, who couldn't run at all. Those are the only two teams that threw for more yards than the Chargers did. So what I'm saying is that shows you how much they need to be able to run the ball. I mean, they're going to be able to pass. I mean, Herbert threw for 700 yards last year. It hurt, and with a beat up offensive line and half his receivers, I mean, they're gonna put up yards through the air. They're gonna pass the ball. You know, you don't want Eckler catching 107 balls again, but they're gonna put up yards and through the air by accident. So they 100% though, way more than Quentin Johnston, way more than any of this explosive offense. What's going to determine, I think, their success is if they can run and be a threat to run. And as we saw last year, we talked about it. I know the three of us talked about it. There's going to be a point in these games you have to run out the clock, to give your defense a break. If they can do that, that's all they need to do. They don't need to lead the league in rushing. But if they're just average and then they can run the ball when they have to, that's what they really need to become, a team that when they need to run it, they can.
And don't worry, Jeff. We're going to get your predictions and put you on the spot here in a bit. So some of those RB3, 4, RB2 spots and tight end spots, we're going to put you on the spot. Don't you worry.
Well, my next question is not necessarily putting Jeff so much on the spot, but it is kind of an over-evaluation of the tight end group, because you just talked about it. The running game, one position that could definitely help it is you get some tight ends in there that can block. And obviously we have lauded Gerald Everett and Donald Parham for their athletic receiving capabilities. But behind that, Tre McKitty is still kind of playing catch up as it relates to getting to that blocking trait that we knew that the Chargers drafted him for out of college. And you have Stone Smartt behind that. And this kind of coincides with what you were talking about in terms of getting the final 53-man roster, because I've said it plenty of times that I still felt that tight end could be a possible target for the Chargers when all of these cut downs start to happen. In terms of just your overall evaluation of the tight end group, in terms of what you feel that they need for this system, maybe outside of Parham and Everett, because we know what they bring in terms of the receiving options, but is there still work to be done as it relates to this group overall?
Jake, you just said it. That's one of those, 53 thing could change. I guarantee you they're going to be looking for blocking tight ends. Like I would be. I mean, if I'm thinking that way, they have to be thinking that way, because you guys nailed it. I mean, that's can be a big part of your running game, and they don't have that. I mean, none of these guys are Gerald Everett. He's a really good receiver. He's got great hands, and he does have these lapses that everybody knows during games. He sometimes checks out in weird moments. I'm not sure what's happening exactly there, but he's an effective receiver. He's not a great blocker. We saw what happened with Tre McKitty last year. Donald Parham, he can do some things, but none of those guys are what you'd call blocking tight ends. So that's something they could be looking at. And another thing, just to sort of keep our eyes on here, like I mentioned, two of those guys got hurt yesterday, or one got hurt in practice. The other one was hurt before. Something happened last week, apparently. There's Hunter Campmoyer. They were using him yesterday. He was in a blocking role, almost like a fullback kind of thing. I mean, they had him out there. So we'll see what happens with the health of those guys, and we'll see what happens who becomes available. I wouldn't be shocked at all, though, if they. That's an area that they don't have an answer right now, and if they're going to try, if they don't have that, they just scheme a different way. But that way they can't scheme right now, because they don't have that, and with this group of tight ends, they're not going to have that.
I think another one that probably has more fans' attention, which I don't know if necessarily justified or not, but the wide receiver 6 spot. And you mentioned injuries. Jalen Guyton still has not stepped foot on the active practice squad in terms of practicing out there at training camp or in preseason or anything like that. He's off of the side field, which has opened the door for guys like a John Hightower and Keelan Doss and all that kind of stuff. Given what we know of Jalen Guyton and his injury and rehab and all that, then also give what we know from the production standpoint, both in camp with John Hightower earning all the touchdowns, all that kind of stuff, and Keelan Doss's consistency. But pairing that with what the Chargers actually need from their wide receiver 6, how do you see that playing out? Like at this point, if they go Jalen Guyton, they would be choosing him without seeing a snap from him. And then if they go a different direction, how do you see it playing out?
I think it'll be Doss. From what we've seen all training camp and really in the off season too, he's been the guy that has been with the ones. So they're going through walkthroughs. The starters are out there. There's a group of guys on the side who are all coming in and out. He's one of those guys. Meanwhile, John Hightower is on the other field with the twos. Well, that hasn't changed. I mean, now Hightower has gotten some chances with the ones. They have given him chances with the ones. So that's not as if he's never out there. That's not accurate at all. But in that setting, that those walkthrough settings, typically that's what we've seen, and that really hasn't changed. So that tells me that Doss is the guy that they're looking at for that spot. John Hightower had that great start to camp. Got hurt. Hasn't been the same since he came back. The game the other night, the preseason game, he had a couple of moments that weren't great. So I think right now that spot, if the roster's set right now, would be Doss. Now, Guyton, we saw him on the field before the game Sunday, the preseason game. This week he was out on the field doing, he was on the field, at least visible, because we had completely lost him for weeks. We hadn't seen him for weeks. That suggests he's getting better. He's coming back. I can't imagine he's going to make enough progress in the next 2 weeks to start the season. My guess is he'll start the season on PUP, and then he'll have to miss the first 4 games at least. And then I would think after that is probably when we would see Guyton. But I think, to answer your question right now, it would be Doss would be that 6th spot.
Final preseason game for the Chargers, going to the Niners. Jeff,
it got
obviously
really dark, right? What happened with my face?
Yeah.
I'm telling you,
lights out moment every time.
I'm telling you, there is one simple thing. At least today, Jeff, there was no dropout in the video, no cuts in the audio. If this is what takes place, we'll accept these little minor things in terms of lighting. So, but I
think that was a John Hightower fan who said, "I'm turning the lights on this guy." Like, I'm telling you,
he's like, I heard it. Now I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
All right.
It's fantastic.
I do the best I can, guys.
This is why having Jeff Miller on the show is always great entertainment. So
two more questions for you. 2 more questions.
Final preseason game for the Chargers heading to the 49ers. Jeff will obviously be there in person, but obviously last week's preseason game against the Saints kind of took a step back from what we saw from week 1 in terms of overall, as what you would like to see from a game. And as far as week 1 against the Rams went, overall performances kind of dipped a little bit from both certain players in the offense and the defense. So going into this final preseason game, what are some of the key things that you're going in to watch for?
Well, I think, JT Woods, his continued development, he has, to his credit, he had a nice finish to training camp. I got to get on board with the fact that training camp's over now. So he had a nice finish to training camp. He really did. And I thought the other night, he had the one where he took a really bad angle, and after the game I talked about it, he owned up to it and said, I got to get the guy on the ground there. You can't have that, and he the one thing he told me in college at Baylor, this idea that he needs to tackle better. He's been hearing this his whole life. He heard the same thing at Baylor. He told me from his junior senior seasons, between his next to last and last season at Baylor, he really took a jump tackling wise. So he's hoping to do that again here in going into his second season. Now he's going to take that jump. So that's a guy who he needs to keep this going now. He's had some nice moments in practice this week. He's got to keep that going. Another guy is Mark Webb, another defensive back who, he's got a spot, I think, on this team right now, at least, the 53. We'll see what happens game day. But, he's got a spot right now, but he's got to get through this game. He's got to continue to show these guys like this trust thing, and that they can, if they need him to go in a game, that he's going to know where to go, and and basically he's going to be able to get guys on the ground if they need him to get somebody on the ground. So like those are two guys who, I think at this moment, I mean, certainly Woods is on the team. I think Webb probably is on the team, but they need to finish this off. They need, we hear it all the time, and in this sport about you got to finish plays, finish games. Well, this is the same thing. You got to finish this preseason now. So I think like the coaches, they like to look at this stuff and see who's kind of playing through the tape. Who's running through the tape. He's saying track and field, like who's finishing strong and who looks like they're maturing, and they're like, okay, now this guy looks like an NFL player, and that's the kind of stuff that they'll be looking for on some of these select players in that game Friday. And those are two of the guys who I think bear watching, because again, they need to finish this and build on this. Tre McKitty's another guy. He needs to be solid and not have any screw ups, not have any don't false start, don't drop a pass, don't just blatantly miss a block. I mean, do what an NFL player should do here and finish this thing off strong. And those are the kind of players who, while I think all those guys are on this team, their position going into week one is still can be greatly influenced exactly, how when they start scheming up for the Dolphins and really get into it, they're going to look at the way some of these guys finish this week here and think, okay, this guy we feel good about, this guy maybe not so much, and they'll scheme up all the starters and the main guys and their plans based on these guys behind them, how they feel. And again, we talked about this trust. How much do they trust all these guys?
Now we'll get you out of here on this last one. It's interesting you mentioned Mark Webb and JT Woods. You're predicting being on the team. So if you just kind of extrapolate that, Mark Webb, JT Woods, Alohi Gilman, Derwin James, which would mean like a Raheem Layne could be the odd man out, which is wild because like Raheem Layne's had a pretty good camp and pretty good preseason so far. So Jake, we were talking about at the beginning, like this 53-man cut down is going to be tough, and there are going to be guys that are going to be taken off this roster that are going to be painful.
Yeah, I think all five of those guys are going to make it. At least that's on my.
Oh, okay.
I'll give you a little snippet of my. It hasn't published yet, but my 53, all five of those safeties are on the team. I think Raheem Layne is going to be on the team too. So
okay, interesting.
I think all five of those guys are going to make it. Now, if I had to choose between Raheem and Webb, it's going to be Raheem, because I think he is he gives you a little more in special teams, and you're going to in that spot you're going to need that third and fourth safety. Those guys are going to be special teams kind of guys, and so no matter what they do on defense, if nothing, they're going to be special teams guys. And Layne has shown us he hits. He's a hitter, and they like him. So specifically to that question, I have all five of those guys making it.
All right. Well, now you're opening up a whole can of worms, because does that mean that
Completely.
you have five? Does that mean that you have five corners or six?
5 corners.
Ooh.
5 corners, 5 safeties.
Okay.
So.
Oh, gushy. Okay. Well then that leads us to this last question. One more preseason game, and maybe give us one on offense and one on defense for each of these. But who has the most to gain out of this preseason game, and who has the most to lose in this preseason game? Oh,
wow. That's a heck of a question there. Most to gain, most to lose. Well, you know what? I'm going to go outside the box a little bit. And based on the way this whole thing started, probably the most to lose is Cameron Dicker, right? What happens if he goes out there?
That's a good point.
I don't know. I don't know that they're both going to kick. We kind of think they are because they did last week. But if Cameron Dicker goes out there and misses a couple of kicks, all of a sudden,
Don't do this, Jeff. Don't do this.
So I'm just saying, if you're looking for a guy who is something, that's a guy who could have something to lose. We just talked about Webb. That's a guy. if he has a bad game, he has some bad moments, he's probably, that 52, 53, 54, 55 guy. He's one of those. And like I said, I think he's on this team right now, but if he has a bad game, that does not bode well. On offense, I guess we're not going to count Dicker as an offensive player because he's a special teams guy. On offense, I'm just trying to think if there's any, maybe, I was going to say like maybe one of those backup offensive linemen, but I think all those guys are good. Maybe like a Tre McKitty is a guy who, I think he's okay, but if he has a bad game,
pressure's building. Pressure's
building.
If
he gets called for holding, he does, whatever. He has a false start, he does, he's a guy, and we saw. And talk about surprises earlier. We saw what Stone Smartt did, and he looked good in that game. Yeah, he was one of the guys who played really well, and he's looked really good in practice. That guy can catch. He's got some good hands. And I think Herbert, he's got a little thing going with Herbert. So McKitty is a guy who, if he does not finish this, like we talked about, he could look, his position could be compromised, at least his status, he's going to play special teams, I think, either way. But in terms of playing on offense, I think, he's a guy who might, unless it's just a straight running play and they need him to try to block, he may not get a whole lot of snaps if he does not finish as well.
All right, so then I guess the other part of that is the Hail Mary attempts. Who has the most to gain in this? Like Elijah Dustin, I don't know if he's even capable of staying on the team. Like, is it like a John Hightower? Could it be like a Taiwan Mullen? Like, are there any guys who, if they ball out this week, could maybe earn themselves a roster spot?
Could really, I'd love to say that. Yeah, there's this guy, and I don't know that there is. I don't think there is, to be honest. I think and part of it is, I think it's probably a pretty good sign that the Chargers they have their rosters pretty set. Totally. And I think it's not that hard to figure out because they didn't change a lot from last season, right? In the offseason, there weren't like a ton of changes. So all these guys we're talking about, other than the draft picks, it's going to be the same guys, starting this season that finished last season. So no, I don't think, other than maybe a guy trying to get a practice squad thing. In terms of the initial 53, I don't think any of these undrafted guys are in a position where they're gonna play their way onto the roster. I just don't think that's going to happen this time around. And now that I said that, there'll be like three guys who it'll be like
it's the Miller curse. It's the Miller curse.
It'll be Austin Eckler all over again. There'll be guys making the team, doing incredible, heroic Superman things. But yeah,
if that's the case, they owe Jeff Miller and Chargers Unleashed a whole bunch of ham for what we're doing for them.
Exactly. We're giving them all the fuel they need. But yeah. I don't know. I don't see that being the case. I know that's happened in the past. And, Eckler obviously is the biggest example probably in the league of that happening in recent memory. I just don't. My feeling is that that's not where this team is, where this roster is.
And that's fair. And that's why we have Jeff Miller on the show, because he gives Chargers fans like a dose of reality and perspective versus all that up in the cloud stuff and getting everybody excited for the drop. But no, seriously, Jeff, you've always been someone that we can count on to kind of talk it like it is and kind of sift through some of the BS that you hear sometimes through training camp, whether it's from fans or critics or pundits. So we appreciate you just like keeping it real, which I think Chargers fans we've heard and have told us like that's one of the things they love about you.
Well, I try. It's all I got. I don't really have, the reality of it is all I can go by what I see. I don't have a lot of depth. I'm not like deep, Popper's deep, X's and O's. He understands all that stuff. I just kind of look at it, what's happening. And those guys are standing over there. So I think that's good for them. And those guys over there, I'm looking at those numbers. No, those guys probably aren't on the team. And these guys probably.
Now you're just a sandbagger. That's not true.
so that it's not terribly scientific. I'm not breaking down tape. I want that to be clear that I'm not, I'm not really grinding on the X's and O's to get some of this stuff. And a lot of it's pretty simple, basic, eye test kind of stuff. So we'll see how it plays out.
Well, whatever you're doing, it's working. Be sure to follow Jeff on X or Twitter or whatever they're going to call it tomorrow. For Jeff Miller at LA Times, Jake Hefner, Dan Wolkenstein here from Chargers Unleashed and LA Football Network. Enjoy the next preseason game versus Niners, and we'll talk to you soon on the next Chargers Unleashed.